It's the voice of Guyana's 102.5 FM, and the time is moved up now to 21 hours and 50 seconds. Of course, hello and welcome. Good evening, everyone. Welcome down to your Tuesday night program, The Police and You. The name, of course, is Stan Gavaya and Mike Side, keeping you company as we say happy Humanabi, or at least what's left of it, to all Guyanese, from the commissioner, senior officers, inspectors, and other ranks of the Guyana Police Force. And certainly hope that today has been a very reflective and a quiet day, that you were able to celebrate and understand the meaning of Humanabi. All right, as is normal on Tuesday night, what we do, we give you a chance to be able to interact with the Guyana Police Force, as we have various members of different either departments or divisions who are on the program. And you can actually, if it is that you have a question, based on something or you'd like some elaboration, you can give us a call on 226-4762. That's 226-4762. Or you can send your question via WhatsApp on, it's 632-0147. That's 632-0147. And get it answered, but let it be specific to the conversation that we have for tonight. And tonight, it's the crime laboratory, or the shortened term, the crime lab of the Guyana Police Force, that is in focus, that we're going to be discussing. And it gives me great pleasure to say a very good night and welcome to the officer in charge of the crime laboratory of the Guyana Police Force. He is none other than Assistant Superintendent Ray Marcurius. Good night and welcome to the program.
Good night, and thank you for having me, Stan. And I also like to wish a happy Humanabi to all my fellow Guyanese.
All right. I know it's kind of crazy, that the holiday that we have to be out, nevertheless, and of course working, but it is the job.
Definitely it is.
And I'm sure when we talk about crime, when we talk about a crime lab, let me just start off by asking. So, many persons would have it in their mind, crime lab, and they watch it, things like CSI and that kind of thing, and those are the things that come to mind. Would you say that your crime lab fits that bill?
Well, yes and no. Now, the crime lab is a section within the Criminal Investigation Department at CID headquarters. And within that crime lab itself, we also have several other sub-departments. For instance, we have the fingerprint department, we have the photographic department, we also have a crime scene unit in between there. We also have some other expert areas as well. We have a ballistics section that will deal with all the firearm examination. We have a bomb disposal unit. We also have a handwriting department as well that would do examination of those signatures to determine forgery and that sort of stuff. So when you hear about the crime lab, you think about crime scene and forensics. Now, a lot of persons tend to confuse the police crime lab with the Guyana Forensic Science Laboratory. We basically two entities. We all work within the same area. There are some aspects of forensics that would be done at the Guyana Forensic Science Laboratory, and some would be done at the police crime lab. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, DNA testing, gunshot residue, and those tests will be done at the Guyana Forensic Science Laboratory, while the ballistics, the fingerprints, and those areas can be done at the police crime lab.
Before I get into some of those things that you did mention, if it's not too much, could you tell us maybe like how many ranks you've got? Because you talk about all of these different things that happens at the crime lab, and it sounds as if you've got a ton of people that are working there.
Well, the crime lab, we have about 32 ranks stationed at the crime lab. And some of these ranks were trained in maybe more than one areas. But in addition to crime scene ranks at the crime lab, we also have crime scene ranks throughout the divisions of the country. And I think the number of those ranks total about 95 in total. They would be indirectly fall under the crime lab. But directly under the crime lab at CID quarters, 32 ranks within that area.
All right. So let's back up now a little bit. One of the things that you did mention that is quite interesting, and at this point, let me just invite those persons who are tuning in. You can actually catch us on our Facebook page at the Guyana Police Force, as well as our YouTube page also at the Guyana Police Force, where you can follow the conversation. You can post your comments, post your questions right there as we continue with tonight's Police and You. Just in case you just joined us, it's the officer in charge of the crime lab who is on with us tonight, Assistant Superintendent Ray Marcurius. Now, Mr. Marcurius, you were talking about some of those different things that fall on the crime lab, and the whole forensics thing. Given the volume of cases that the Guyana Police Force would have to solve, I would say, on a daily basis, or so much that is coming to the office, right? A variety of things. It therefore speaks about a variety of skill set of those persons who are working in the crime lab. So let's just say a person would like to, be in the crime lab. What was some of the skills and qualifications you'd say that they'd have to have?
Well, Stan, normally we recruit persons who would normally join the Guyana Police Force. They would go through the standard police training, and then some of them would be branched out to different areas of the police force, and then they would be sent on a crime scene investigation. That's a basic crime scene investigation course. And following that training, they would be attached to the crime lab or to a crime scene unit within the police and various police and divisions. Now, that's just the basic training. Now, at the crime lab, you would receive on-the-job training. You'll also be exposed to several various training from different countries. For instance, we benefit from a lot of training from India in the areas of fingerprint. Also, the Justice Education Society recently concluded some training with us for quite a number of years. And all of those areas now we're going to help those ranks to boost those areas of skills and so on. And especially because the thing about this department is that you require a lot of specialized personnel, like specialized in ballistics, specialized in fingerprint examination. And these are persons who are going to be given expert evidence in court. So it's not an area that you could just come in today and tomorrow you're fully functional. It takes a lot of time to develop and nurture these ranks into becoming full-fledged expert that could testify in court.
And so chances are, once they get to that department and they show that acuteness in learning, you tend to keep them there.
Yes, definitely. We tend to retain them.
All right. You mentioned handwriting. That is something that is amazing. When you talk about handwriting, and I know maybe for example, like matters, if I'm correct, like there are issues of forgery, or in cases of like people's last will and testament, or some sort of document, and you look for forgery. How is that really done to be able to decipher what is real and what is not?
Those investigations related to forgery, those investigations would normally be handled by the fraud department for the CID, and they will hand over those specimen handwriting. Let's say you suspect this handwriting to be forged. Now, what the expert is going to do, the expert is going to study the suspect handwriting that is you being suspected, that is the questionable signature, and they're going to now study the handwriting of the the person, let's say, who you're purporting to sign the will. Let's say John Jones left a piece of land. The expert is going to have to study John Jones' handwriting extensively, and he's going to understand the distinctive way in how these letters are formed. Now, let me just make it clear for the ordinary person to understand. Every person, your handwriting, the way how you form your letters are unique. So there's a lot of different formation and different characteristics that expert would look for, and the sequence of them, the depth in how you would press handle your pen, and a lot of different factors that would determine in terms of bring this uniqueness to this handwriting. So those are some of the stuff that the expert would use. There's a lot of extensive stuff, and some of them you wouldn't even be putting out in the public. Mm-hmm. But they would study the handwriting of that person, and then they would study the handwriting of the suspect, and then that comparison is done against the questionable signature, and that determination is made whether it's forged.
Has there ever been any cases that you are aware of or can recall where the signature is dubious because it was done on the duress? So let's just say in a matter of, because I've heard people have these discussions, and so as a matter of fact, I throw it out. Yes, the person would have signed this last will and testament, but they did it on the duress, and it was not what they really meant. Can that be detected too?
Yes, really? A person really cannot change the handwriting. They could try to disguise it, and if a person signing, let's say a person, and the signatures change depending if a person is healthy, and as some old age you get sick, you have certain kind of the writing pace, and all of those things are gonna, the speed of writing, all that can be determined. Those are things that would change, but the unique characteristics of your signature is gonna remain. So even if you're signing under duress, the characteristics of the way how you form your letters is still going to remain the same. Those things are not going to change. Now, you have some person now who will try to study another person's handwriting, try to mimic it, and that's also detected.
And that could also be...
Yeah, it is, and it's something that's done often.
Really? All right. So, in a case like that, your specialist in that field becomes an expert witness in a court once the matter goes to court.
Yes.
And in cases where forgery has come, is in question, whether it's a document or something, what would you say is the success rate like, obviously, for the Guyana Police Force through the work that you would have put out?
I'm trying to think of a failure.
No failure?
We have a very high success rate, I can tell you that for sure. The cases that we have for handwriting, if not all of them, would lead to convictions, especially in the handwriting department. I can tell you that for a fact.
You find most of these that come your way. Are there situations? What are most of the situations that come your way?
You have a lot of cases with, especially with will, last will, and property disputes, and those matters. You also have some other form of fraud and forgery, like checks, and so on. But the majority will be property related and so on. So we have, if a person's, a lot of times somebody might die for you and they suspect that they left a will. You'll find some family member would come forward to the police if they suspect that it will be forged, and the investigation will be launched, and the documents will be sent to the handwriting department, and they will be able to determine whether the signature was forged or not.
All right, very interesting and intriguing. You did mention and the thing about it is that, as you did mention, whilst where you are is at the crime lab headquarters, you also have ranks spread out throughout the country.
Yes, but those ranks tend to be mostly the crime scene investigators that are processing scene, photograph, fingerprint, and evidence collection. But these experts in the handwriting, the ballistics expert, Those are going to be at the CID headquarters.
So any of those things, any part of the country, any matter like that, it will have to come down.
Yes, it will be forwarded to Georgetown, the crime lab.
Now let's talk about, you talked about ballistics.
Yes.
That's another specialized thing now. And that evidently means when you speak about ballistics, is it just about the dusting of someone's hand to determine if they used a weapon, or is it, walk me through this, or is it the type of weapon that was used in a gun?
Now, the ballistics or / firearm examination section, what that section does is we have the firearm examiners and experts in or what we call ballistics experts. These ranks are going to examine firearm, determine whether, a lot of times you may have cases of a shooting, shell casings and those stuff might be left at scenes, and we are able to look at those cases and compare them with other shell casings and compare them against firearm and determine whether that firearm would have been used to discharge a particular round or would have discharged that rejected that particular shell casing. So these experts will be able to determine whether a firearm, a particular type of firearm, was used at the crime scene. They're also going to be able to tell you the caliber of the different bullets and a lot of other information that may related to firearm use at crime scenes.
Do you check, like for example, when there is a situation, lots of times when the police may do raids or they find an illegal firearm, one of the things that also happens is that you find the serial numbers are usually sawn off, right?
Correct.
Could you do any matching to be able to identify maybe where this came from, or as some people say, whether it is that it has bodies? That's the term you hear people say, whether it's a hot piece of weapon or so.
Yes, we do. And as I told you before, the shell casings and those ballistic, whether or not you...
So even if it is filed off?
Even if it's filed off, we can still, the filing off of the serial number has no effect on the ballistics, the ballistic test on that firearm, particular firearm. So it could still be done readily straightforward.
So many persons who are doing that, they're basically wasting time once it gets into your hands.
Yes, definitely, because we can still compare it to different scenes.
All right, and what about those in cases where bullets are shot, a person is shot, they die. Do you have situations where that spent shell or what comes out of the person would have to come to you for examination?
Yes, all those crime scenes, the spent shell recovered, the projectile, as we call it, you might call it bullet, that's recovered from the body, or sometimes you can find bullets at scenes as well. All those come to the ballistics department, and we have examination being done on those firearms. We have several cases before the court where we had convictions based on ballistics test results.
What about, now you did mention fingerprints, and before I go into the other part of fingerprints per se, but as it relates to firearm particularly, many people seem to think that, well, they see it in movies, so maybe they can do it. They use it and then they wipe it off and they throw it overboard, and that fingerprint is going to be gone, or what's that? So it's going to make your work difficult.
No,
True or false?
The thing about fingerprint is a composition of sweat and other oils and so on from the skin and protein. So it is one of those evidence is very fragile. Fingerprint, it could be easily destroyed. And that is why one of the reasons why in crime scene investigation you see so much emphasis being placed on security of the scene, not allowing too much a person to have access, is in order to preserve those fragile evidence at scene. A fingerprint is indeed one of those evidence that could be easily destroyed or removed.
All right. And therefore, so in matters, especially like in fingerprints, what would you say to a person turns up at home, they went out, turn up at their home or their business place, and then they notice that it is broken into. they have no idea as to who came into that place. But you know, usually we tend to, the first thing we want to do is start running and searching and touching and checking and what's not. What would you say to someone if they turn up at home and they discover that their place has been broken into?
Well, one of the first things you do in those situations is to make sure that the area is safe. You secure the area. You don't go tumbling. As I said, you don't go inviting people over, friends, to show them going through stuff. What you want to do, in order to preserve those evidence, I think the main evidence that we usually get from those scenes is fingerprint is one of those areas. And you gotta avoid touching anything that you can damage or destroy fingerprint. So that is one of the main advice I would give to people. Don't go through anything, preserve the area, and get to the police and get the crime scene persons there as soon as possible. Because the longer you wait is the more likely that something is going to destroy those evidence.
But you know some people, I mean, it may sound funny, but I understand what you're saying, but just picture this, you come home, you know that, all right, good, you got a particular piece of jewelry, expensive piece of jewelry, or you got a particular safe that, you know, it's got a little stash. You know, some people would still want to do that, right? And then you come now and you discover that your door is jammed open or wrenched open. You're thinking about calling out police with me. You gotta check to see, you know, if them things still there.
It happens.
Right? And then, you know, something, yes, you hold, you touch, you do whatever the case might be, then discover. Or you know, sometimes the people don't carry everything. You know, some of these people got manners. They take some and they left back some. And they sit down, they checking up, and then they discover, well, or for whatever reason, it mightn't be manners, but maybe they were, you know, alerted otherwise, so they didn't get to cart off everything. Right? But then you, as you rightly would have mentioned, tumble. Right? Yeah. It's kind of like a human nature that you'd find persons will want to go see if they could secure what.
Yeah, that's true. It happens. But you got to remember, at the end of the day, you want justice, mm-hmm. and you want that particular perpetrator to be caught, to be put behind bars. And this is not just for you. When you damage that scene and make it difficult for us to get evidence, it increases the chance of that person getting away with a crime. And tomorrow he's going to go at somebody else's door, and he's going to continue until the police they're being caught. So, as part of your duty to yourself to get justice, and as part of to help prevent others from suffering the same fate, you got to focus and you got to do the right thing. Secure the area and get the experts there, and they're going to process that scene so we can be able to identify the perpetrator.
Have you ever had situations where, in terms of fingerprinting, you find a fingerprint that doesn't belong to anyone who is, let's say, resident or domiciled at that place that had the incident, and you go through your database and it doesn't match any there, and it therefore then stalls what you do because you don't have a match for this fingerprint?
Yeah, we do. You have cases like that from time to time. What happens? You remember, according to the Police Act, the police, we are allowed to take fingerprints from persons who are in lawful custody. So the database does not include every single person in the country. So you're going to have persons who might not have hit the police radar as yet, but eventually they do. So we have those fingerprints in our system, and eventually when we caught up with you, we're going to be able to make that match.
Okay, so once you find something that doesn't have a match, you still store it?
It's still stored. It's still stored. We're just waiting till when we get the fingerprints that's going to match with it.
Because you never know, sometime they might decide to go again.
Yeah, some of you might get, when we finally find the fingerprint, if it's 2 years, 3 years, how much, wherever it be, that person is going to be arrested and charged for that crime.
And this must be tedious work.
It is. When you look at the fingerprint requires good eyesight. I can tell you that for a fact. You have to look at all of those small, for the average person, you're looking at these lines on the fingers. We call them ridges. And this is what we're looking at, the form distinct characteristics. And this will make fingerprints unique. the formation of these ridges on the skin. And that's what we're looking for. The amazing thing with fingerprint is that there's no two fingerprint that is exactly the same. Even on your own hands, all 10 of the fingerprints on your hands are different.
Have me looking at my hands right now. All right, now let's turn now a little bit to the photography, which is, I think, one of the most common and popular ones that we do see at crime scenes, where, ranks are out there and they're taking pictures. Oftentimes people are thinking that, this is just easy work because anybody could just point a camera and take a photograph. But it must be something special for them to be doing what they do.
Crime scene photography, or forensic photography as they call it. One of the main purpose photography is to document the scene. You see, when the case reaches the court, you need to present, to give the magistrate, the judge, or the jury, they need to have an accurate account of the scene as it was when the crime scene persons arrive at the scene. So photography and also videography, and those areas come hand in hand, is the methods that we would use to document those scenes. Now, as you rightly said, photography in crime scenes are not done like a regular person shooting with a camera. You got to cover the scene, you have to take overall shots, you got to have linking shots, so that when you're looking at the photograph, you could be able to tell where this is and the background and how it links to other surrounding items and those areas. So it's not just randomly taking pictures at the scene. These ranks have to be trained in these areas in terms of how to take photographs.
All right. Mm-hmm. And to be able to tell a story. In cases of, again, maybe murders, do they also have to be part of or to complete their file, photograph the post-mortem?
Yeah, that is also part of the the department. So you have to be at the mortuary and take photographs. Not only photographs, also the mortuary is an area we will also use to collect evidence. For instance, we spoke about the ballistics. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times the projectile would be lodged in the body, and it's at the post-mortem examination when you recover those stuff. So we have crime scene investigators at the mortuary as well, collecting samples.
So usually that's one of the reasons why most of post-mortems, especially of matters of that nature,
you have police.
You have the police, but particularly from your your department.
Yes, at all those matters we have police from our department.
Because they will obviously know how to store it, handle it, and so on.
Yes, correct.
Very interesting and intriguing kind of job. And this, of course, would you say is a thankless job?
No, it would.
It's not.
It's not. It gives you great satisfaction when you work on a case and you're able to see that case complete successfully. Not all the time you're not just looking at a conviction, but you're looking at the case. I should say, you're looking at the sort of justice. So now, sometimes you're working on a case, and once there's enough evidence, and the court finds the person guilty. So your job is the thing about crime scene is not you're not working to get a conviction, but you're working to present the evidence as it be, and that's your job as a crime scene investigator. You visit the scene, you document, and you present it to the court. It's the court decision to decide on whether they should convict or whether they should acquit.
Know that with the strategic plan of the Guyana Police Force, it spoke about the modernizing of the Guyana Police Force and obviously taking it into the 21st century. What would you say is your department's move or shift along that area in terms of the resources and equipment that are needed to aid in what you're doing?
Well, the thing about our with crime scene investigation is it's based on a lot of science, and as you know, science is ever evolving, and there's a lot of different new technology out there, and we're seeking to acquire a lot more areas. I mean, for instance, we're looking at some new equipment to automate some aspects of our ballistics and ballistic testing. We already have automated systems in the fingerprint department, but we're trying to move those areas ahead. And there are a lot of different new technology out there in terms of fingerprinting. We had, for instance, the old way of doing of getting fingerprints is through dusting. There are now new infrared systems that could be able to detect fingerprint much more effectively. And we have recently moved to acquire one of those equipment. And ranks are being trained now in order to start rolling it and making use of that equipment. So we are working. Crime and criminals are advancing. They're using the internet, they're reading and so on, and they're trying to get better at getting away with what they do. And we have to keep up. We don't have a choice.
One of the complaints that you see oftentimes with people on social media is the length of time that the police may take to, let's say, remove a body from a crime scene. And they often say that if it is that the police had moved faster, that person could have been saved, or that person, or evidence could have been, greater. Walk us through why sometimes, as much as the initial set of ranks you get on the scene, there seems to be a waiting to the average onlooker or passerby before certain action is taken.
Now, let me just clarify one point. If there's an incident and a person is injured at the crime scene, the first priority of any police officer responding to that would be to preserve that person's life. Even if it means that evidence will be destroyed during the process, the priority is saving life. So there's no situation where you have an injured person lying on the scene waiting for a crime scene investigation unit. That person will be rushed to the hospital. That's priority. That comes first. Now, in other cases where you have a person where you probably may have the EMT responding to the scene and pronouncing that person dead at the location. The duty now for the responders, the uniformed police, would be to secure that area, prevent access from persons gathering around. And in Guyana, we tend to have a culture of persons when we see certain things, a large amount of people rush to the area. And that kind of harms investigation. You need that area to be secured, and so that when the crime scene, our team arrive, that area is undisturbed. Fingerprint evidence and DNA evidence and all of these areas are there, uncontaminated. And that's important to have successful prosecution in cases. And this is something that not just the police alone, we need public support in these areas. It's hardly any scene where the police discover. It's almost always a civilian, some person discovers some person dead or some crime scene. And within the time that it takes the police to respond, you have a duty to help to preserve that scene.
What would you say to that person in cases like that? When it's a civilian that discovers someone dead, and I think today we did see a body was found in Region 3. I think yesterday they discovered another body of a person who it was eventually found that it was stung by bees, but of course a post-mortem is going to determine that. So as you're rightly saying, a civilian, and then they picked up the phone, they called. Between the 15-20 minutes or what's that for the police to get there, what should that person who made the call do? And the other persons who I would say are morbid, curious people.
Well, I'm speaking here presuming that the person's already dead. So within that period of time, that person now will need to take up a leadership role and try to keep person out from that particular scene area. I mean, you might not convince everybody, but you could get a few persons to work along with you, and y'all could keep the area. And you advise person to keep out so that you don't contaminate, don't go and touch and turn and things. You got some cases where you might find somebody die and accident scene. You see this a lot. Persons going and tumbling through the vehicle and all of these stuff. This is not right. It's not something that's supposed to be done. So that's why you need public support in order to stamp out and eradicate this kind of behavior. And you have persons there, responsible persons, who need to take charge of certain situation until the police get there. The police is not going to be everywhere all the time.
In some cases, especially in accidents, we've heard so many situations about it. People say, well, and they use the term, but people are sick. They actually rob the dead. They go there with this pretense that they're helping, maybe to take them out of the vehicle, if it's a crash or whatsoever, but they're rifling through pockets. There was a video on social media just recently we saw where apparently somebody was being, the video was showing where two persons were fighting, right? And the video caught someone going up to them, operating as if they're going to part, but basically going into the person's pocket. That is maybe what you would say how society has become. Just went into the pocket, took what they had to take. I remember one night we left here and we actually walked into our crime scene. There were people who literally started to go and pick up stuff out of the people's vehicles. And it took a stern shouting by the police rank who was with me in plain clothes to get some of them to back off. But then it seems as if that's their concern. People are literally there bleeding out and dying, but their concern is to see what they can actually get. I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that.
That is very distasteful. And it's very upsetting to watch a lot of those videos. You see people now in a position, you have an opportunity to assist, to help. And you use that opportunity for what should I say, personal, for greed. And I think we need to, we got to get a lot more programs and so on to educate people to move away from this kind of thinking. And I think you have upstanding persons in society who need to also, who are those scenes, who need to voice and speak out more as well too. You can't have a few bad apples, I should say a voiceless minority prevailing because you have a few good men who do nothing.
All right, I want to come back and elaborate a little bit on that, but I rather suspect we've got a caller on the phone right now, so I want to open the phone line and see if we could take this call. Caller, a very good evening to you. Welcome to Police and You.
Very good evening to you, Mr. Governor, and this the police. I was just listening now, so you were saying that the crime scene, if you go there, you can tamper with the evidence. Right? So, let's put the breakdown police station, like how everything is being moved out. What is happening there? How can they know what causes the fire after all has been removed? A very good night to you.
All right, thanks for coming through. I'll let DSP Marcurius answer you.
Son, I'm not able to comment on specific investigations because these are matters that are actively before the court. However, the fire scenes, generally the main investigations are usually done by the Guyana Fire Service, and we would normally lend a supporting role. I would not be able to say whether they would be able to complete their investigation. I think that's a matter for the fire service to answer.
If I do recall, they put out a release about what their findings. They did put out a release.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, they did.
They did. But maybe if you address it holistically, I think the general thing is how soon should a cleanup of a place happen? And this is not just for the recent fire at Breakdown, but any crime scene. How soon should cleanup happen after a crime was committed? What is the recommended? Is there a recommended time period or a process or procedure that has to happen before
There can be no fixed amount of time. You see, it all depends on the investigation. Depends on how, if the crime scene investigation aspect would have been completed, then there's no need to keep the scene. However, if it is incomplete, and depending on, it all depends. These are decisions that got to be made on a case-by-case basis. It's not something we could just look at and determine, well, this scene was not kept long enough, or this scene, and vice versa. It has to be made on a case-by-case basis by persons who are actively involved in that particular investigation. So you're not able for looking from the outside, it's very hard to tell whether how the investigation will progress in a particular scene.
There are cases where persons have written to the press or would have taken to social media complaining about in a case where, let's just say, it might have been a motor vehicle that belongs to them. It was involved in a criminal offense. Let's just say the fetching of illegal or narcotics, or someone was shot in it. But for them, it's their, for example, it's their minibus, it's their livelihood, and you take it and you're supposed to you do what you have to do, but then it sits at the police station for a very long time, and it's putting them out of bread. They can't get their vehicle, they can't get to do anything with it. You're still holding on to it, and they're only hearing, well, oh, it's not finished, even though you would have extricated whatever evidence that's from them that you were able to. What would you say about that?
Now, from the crime scene aspect of it, when we would have finished process of vehicle, we would normally release the vehicle. But sometimes in some of these cases, they have other considerations as to why a vehicle would be kept as exhibit, and those would be done by other departments. But some of them have to be kept because of the court orders and a lot of other different cases. So that might be some of the cases. Some of these vehicles also you might see being kept. There's no owner, there's no legal owner. They don't have any registration and all of those. Some might be smuggled vehicles, and a lot of different cases. Reasons might be there why a vehicle could be kept for a long period of time by the police. But you hardly have a case where that the crime scene aspect, where just processing for collection of evidence, would take months and years. That aspect would be concluded in most cases in a shorter span of time, unless there is some form of some others outside of the ordinary situation.
In cases like that, where we would have had over the years matters of like drive-by shootings and so on, persons being shot in their vehicles and so on. Those vehicles were taken. Does the crime lab clean up those vehicles after processing evidence before returning to the owner or owners? Or do we return it just the way? Like, so someone was shot in a vehicle, and evidently the vehicle goes to processing because there are lots of bullets bullet holes that have riddled that vehicle. So you're examining it and you're pulling your evidence from that. So the actual vehicle comes to you, but it's not in a state where it can't be used or fixed back or anything. When that is done, all of the blood and the gore or what's not that would have been in that vehicle, is that cleaned off or cleaned out before it's returned to the owner or owners, or you return it to them that way?
Well, we would remove the evidence, the bullets and those shell casing and those stuff would be removed. But in terms of cleaning out blood and so on, maybe you have blood all over the seats, sometimes soaked into the vehicle. That would be beyond our capability. I think a lot of times you have owners who have to probably buy new seats in those situations. So we would assist in whatever way we can. However, there's some aspect of it that we will not be able, and the owner of the vehicle will have to stand those additional costs. So in terms of you have blood and the owner will have to facilitate having that vehicle clean and to that extent and so on. or change the seats and so on. That wouldn't be a cause that the police would stand.
Have you had situations where persons then point fingers and say, well, I would have had X, Y, Z in my vehicle, and now it is not there now that it's returned?
Well, we haven't had that experience. I've been at the lab for a certain amount of period, and we haven't had that experience since I am there in the department. I imagine they probably would have had cases like that before, and those cases are usually, once they're reported, they would normally be thoroughly investigated.
All right. Why I did ask, because a lot of persons came out after there was the crash of the airplane. It was, I believe it was, that ran off the airway a couple of years back. There were some of those persons who responded, fire people by the way, who they found had persons' belongings and some of the stuff that belonged to that airplane in their personal possession afterwards. And so a lot of people would say, oh, well, and why them police do the same thing too when they come and they take up waiting or what's not, and then they turn say gone for evidence, and then next thing you know the evidence disappear or they can't find it. What would you say to that?
That particular case that you would have raised there, those cases was, as I tell you, once those cases are reported, once we have information about those cases, they are investigated and persons are charged and placed before the courts. The police force, in like all other organizations and like the police force in all other countries, they will have cases. The employees you're dealing with human beings, and human beings are not perfect. You will have some cases where persons would, being law enforcement officers, would find themselves outside of the law, and they have systems in place to deal with those situations. But evidence in the police force are being properly handled. We have systems in place. For instance, at the CID courts, we have a property room that was designed by the Justice Education Society of Canada. So we have those systems in place where evidence are logged. They are under video cameras and all of those stuff.
All right. Turn our attention now to it's 2021. You mentioned earlier that criminal-minded persons are getting more advanced in what they're doing. And it was, I believe, some persons who posited that I think it was at the last GIPEX oil and gas forum that with oil and gas, one of the things that will come is not only the good, but also some of the bad. And part of the bad is those persons who will be seeking to get involved in criminal enterprises and to fleece others. We had situations, for example, where I believe it was early last year where a gentleman was found in a hotel room with a load of credit cards that they were manufacturing or making. What is the police force, particularly your department, doing to be able to get on top of that game, knowing that you've got some of those kinds of criminal minds that may decide to come this side?
Now, some of the areas that we do to guard against those areas, there's eventualities. Those are things that are going to come here, keep coming to Guyana. It's through training. We have a lot of training we have other Caribbean countries. You have the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, where we have various countries sharing information with law enforcement officers. We have online courses. Recently, we had a course on skimming of ATM cards. That's where you have certain criminals, and this is something that's common in countries like Trinidad and Venezuela and these other countries. We have sophisticated crime. Persons will set up cameras and so on at these ATM machines and would skim money off of your card when you use the card into the system. So all of these police here are being trained in. You cannot wait until those things, you have those crimes start raising their head here. We have to be training in advance. And that's something that's continuous with the organization.
It's continuous.
It's continuous.
All right, that's awesome. Any recent cases that would have been before the court that are already adjudicated that you could make mention of that were as of a direct success for the Guyana Police Force based on the work of your crime lab?
Well, we have quite a few cases.
I know you didn't see many, but any that were recently concluded where there was a conviction or there was, here, this is the incontrovertible evidence, this is so.
We had a few cases, especially a large amount of cases from firearms, where persons would have been arrested for possession of firearms. Those firearms would come to the crime lab, and they would have to examine and determine whether these are indeed firearms. We have quite a few break and enter scenes and so on, and robbery scenes that would have been solved by fingerprint evidence. We had a murder case from over the river that we would have done, where DNA evidence as well would have been able to assist significantly in putting the perpetrator behind bars. So we have quite a few cases where the forensic evidence is being used. And the forensic evidence is used in support of other form of evidence. You have the investigation department, and they would normally question suspects, and you have to work in collaboration. And sometimes you get a confession from somebody, you still got to get forensic evidence to back up that confession, and vice versa. Sometimes the forensic evidence comes first, and from the forensic evidence, the person is confronted with those evidence, and they eventually lead to a confession.
Well, when interesting, you talked about DNA evidence. We have the capabilities in Guyana right now to be able to do some DNA testing, which is, of course, kudos. The years gone by, what would have happened, lots of times samples had to be taken and sent overseas.
Correct.
And you would have to wait inordinate amount of time. How has the ability to actually collaborate with some of the other agencies, and particularly the National
Forensic Science Laboratory.
Science Laboratory, how is this impacting the speed with which you're able to crack cases or to be able to bring finality to some of those questions?
One of the main advantages of having DNA testing locally is that you could, we are now able to send a larger amount of cases to do DNA testing. And what is also doing to have it locally too also is going to help us in order to create a database. When you send a sample overseas to a private lab, the lab would test just those samples together and then send you back a report whether it's a match or not. But when you have a local DNA lab, all of those cases, the DNA profile is in the system. So you create an entire DNA database.
You keep growing your database.
And you keep growing your database over time. So eventually you find cases that are going to link against previous cases and so on. So that's one of the main advantage of having the DNA testing locally. I think something that I think presently they're working on legislation so that police now could be able to take samples from suspects and, eventually be able to grow a larger database compared to what they have in the U.S. and those other countries. So you collect a sample from a scene, you'll be able to have that database that we can send it to do a comparison against.
When it comes to DNA testing, and when we talk now about sexual offenses, which is something that usually, because it's not discussed in the open, or even there's no trial in the open, it's usually in camera, based on legislation. One of the things when it comes to sexual offenses is to be able to get the kind of evidence that is needed. What are some of the possibilities? Is it like people just see on the televisions where you go to the suspect and you pluck a hair from them, or you try to get a piece of their clothing to go examine it? Is it the same, or is it a little bit more intricate in terms of being able to get those kinds of samples, swabbing and those kinds of things?
The theory that is being presented that you might see on CSI is true. However, it's not exactly the same. It's a much more painstaking process. Like for instance, you're taking a swab, it's not just go plucking it here. You got to make sure that your gloves up, the conditions are sterile. You have, and there's a lot, the way how you package it, it has to be properly air dried and or refrigerated and all of those things. Steps, those are a lot of steps that come into play in terms of dealing with this evidence. And DNA evidence, for one, is very susceptible to contamination. So you got to have right conditions and so on in terms of when you're dealing with those particular samples.
Can you recall in any case where there is no weapon used to kill someone, where, let's just say, like a gun or anything, but that person died and there was a struggle, where you might have been able to find DNA sample maybe under the nails of the deceased, even if it is that they were then found in a decomposed state. And if they are decomposed, how does that impact the evidence or the sample that is taken?
One of the things with forensic evidence is it tends to deteriorate with time, and DNA evidence falls within that category. As the body decomposes to a certain extent, we will look at different areas to get recovered DNA. And if the body, as it is more fresh, we'll get easily get DNA evidence on the surfaces. But once you reach a state of decomposition, now we have to go to other areas. We might have to take samples of bones and those other areas. So that is why it's important to get to the scene as early as possible. But there's some situations where you really don't have a choice. Let's say, for instance, somebody's body was buried for weeks, and then you find the body after that period of time. You basically got to work with what you have. So in those situations, in those situations there now, it depends on the timing and all that to determine which sample you decide going to be the best. We do use fingernail clippings as a form of evidence, but it might not be the best source in every case. As I say, it depends on how long the body was exposed for and a lot of other different factors.
Finally, let's look at the situation of counterfeiting. Guyana doesn't print its own money. And there are many other documents that are important that we do not necessarily produce here. There are specific firms that do that for us. We've had in many situations lots of counterfeits being passed off on people, and a lot of people themselves were caught unawares, not even knowing it's counterfeit. But this is where the crime lab comes in. How does that work in terms of being able to identify the counterfeit?
Well, we don't do the counterfeit examination directly at the crime lab. What we would do is the police would package it and then submit it to the Guyana Forensic Science Laboratory. And they have the capabilities to do to determine whether it's counterfeit or whether it's a legitimate currency. So that doesn't fall directly under the crime lab. It would fall under the Guyana Forensic Science Laboratory.
Okay, but so once again, you just pass on.
We pass it on to them and follow the normal documentations, and they're going to examine it and produce a report as to whether, and they're going to determine whether the person gets charged, and the report is going to be tendered as evidence.
All right. It's 21 hours 59. Can't believe we've been talking for practically an hour. I'd certainly like to ask you more because I am learning, and I'm sure those who are listening and watching are learning too about this. Let me just ask for you to reiterate, however, ASP Marcurius. So there is this young man, there's this young woman who has a desire to get into this particular field. You did mention, however, that it's mandatory for them to have the necessary training in the Guyana Police Force. As a policeman or woman, but what would be some of the basics that you would recommend that they come with also, if it is that they'd like to be able to be a part of the crime lab?
One of the best to be a part of the crime lab is science. Science is an asset. Crime scene investigation, forensics, all based on science. And if, let's say, for a young man or young woman interested in becoming a crime scene investigator or a forensic examiner, the best route to pursue is areas in science, chemistry, physics, biology, and these areas. And so when you join the police force now, when you come in the crime lab, you start doing crime scene investigation training, you're going to run into all of these different things. Lucard exchange principle and all of these different principles you're going to come out are based on science. So that would be my advice to you. As you're in school, focus on school and pursue science as an area.
Awesome. Science, physics, chemistry, biology.
Not leaving out mathematics.
And of course mathematics, because you've got to work in matrix and the matrices. ASP Ray Marcurius, thank you very much for spending some time with us and policing you tonight. Looking forward to having you back again as we continue a very interesting and intriguing conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. And of course, a big thank you to all those of you who have been tuned in tonight on this edition of Policing You on this holiday night. My name is Stan Gavaya on behalf of Avendra Raj Bali, as well as we've got Simeon Brown in studio and the camera crew from NCN. My name is Stan Gavaya saying thanks for joining us on behalf of the CCU of the Guyana Police Force. Do be safe. Take care of yourselves on the roadways. Have a good night.